Welcome. We will talk about the history of ancient Egypt in the late Paleolithic. The climate in North Africa gradually turned hot and dry, forcing the region's population to concentrate along the Nile Valley. Since Neanderthals began living in the region in the late Ice Age 120,000 years ago, the Nile River has become Egypt's lifeline. Fertility associated with the flood of the Nile gave the population the opportunity to develop an agricultural economy and consolidate the stability of a centralized society, which has become, as some see, the cornerstone of the history of human civilization. Some historians believe that the construction of the pyramids in Egypt was one of its purposes to complete the fusion of the people with each other, as it gathered workers from all over Egypt to participate in building the pyramids. These were national projects in which the different populations participated, cooperating in work and living with each other, in addition to uniting their doctrinal vision that Pharaoh he takes care of their affairs in the world, and after his death he goes to the gods and begs them to help the inhabitants to live and preserve them. Also, before the beginning of the pre-dynastic era, the arid Egyptian climate was less arid than it is today. Large areas of Egypt were covered by savanna grass and traversed by grazing herds of ungulates. The animal and plant wealth was more abundant than now in all regions, and the Nile River region helped breed groups of waterfowl. Hunting was common among the Egyptians in that period, in which many animals were also domesticated. In about 5000 BC, small tribes lived in the Nile Valley and grew and developed a series of cultures that were dominated by agriculture and animal husbandry, in addition to the collections of pottery and private property that were found. The largest of these cultures was the Badari culture in Upper Egypt, which was famous for its high-quality ceramics, stone tools, and its use of copper. In the north, the Badari were followed by the Amratian and Jersian civilizations, which showed a number of technological advances. During the Jersian period, early evidence establishes contact with Canaan and the coast of Byblos. In the south, the Naqada culture paralleled the Badari culture and began to expand along the Nile by about 4000 BC. Early during the Naqada civilization, the ancient Egyptians imported obsidian from Ethiopia, which was used to transport feathers among other things. Over a period of about 1000 years, the Naqada civilization developed from small farming societies into a powerful civilization whose leaders had complete control over the people and resources of the Nile Valley. The Naqada leaders sought to extend their control over Egypt in the north along the Nile River by establishing power centers in Hierakonpolis and then in Abydos. They traded with the Nubia in the south, the oases of the western desert in the west, and the cultures of the eastern Mediterranean in the east. A reflection of the increasing power and wealth of the elite class, the Naqada peoples made a variety of precious goods, which included painted pottery, decorative stone vases of high quality, paintings, and jewelry made of gold, lapid, and ivory. They also developed glazed ceramics known as faience, which were used in the Roman era to decorate cups, amulets, and statues. Towards the end of the pre-dynastic era, the Naqada peoples began using written symbols that would eventually evolve into a complete system of hieroglyphs for writing the ancient Egyptian language. Also, an Egyptian priest in the 3rd century BC classified the pharaohs from Menes to his era into 30 ruling dynasties, the same classification that is still used today. He chose to start his official classification with King Menei, who is believed to have united the kingdoms of Upper and Lower Egypt together around the year 3200 BC. The transition to a unified state occurred gradually, more so than the ancient Egyptian writers thought, and there are no contemporary records of Menes. However, some researchers now believe that the legendary Menes is the same as the pharaoh Narmer, who is depicted wearing royal garb on the Narmer ceremonial palette in a symbolic move of monotheism. In the early dynasty around 3150 BC, the first pharaoh extended his control over Lower Egypt by establishing a capital at Memphis, from which he could control the labor force and agriculture of the fertile delta region, as well as control of trade going to the Levant. The power and influence of the pharaohs at that time was reflected in the status of their tombs and structures, which were used to celebrate the pharaoh after his death. Monarchy and its power were developed by the pharaohs legitimizing the state's control over the land, labor, and resources that were indispensable to the survival and growth of the ancient Egyptian civilization. Also, the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom restored the country's prosperity and stability, stimulating art, literature, and massive building projects. Mentuhotep II and his successors from the 11th dynasty ruled the country from Thebes as the capital of the country, but soon the matter changed when Minister Amenemhat I handed over the ownership to the 12th dynasty in 1985 BC, when he changed the capital and made it to Tatai, which is located in Fayum now. The pharaohs of the 12th dynasty developed a long-term plan for land reclamation and irrigation systems to increase agricultural production in the country. More than that, the army recovered the Nubia region, which is rich in quarries and gold, and the workers worked to build a defensive structure in the eastern delta, which was called to repel external attacks. The country flourished in art and religion under military security, politics, and agricultural security. In contrast to the attitude of the Old Kingdom elite towards the gods, the Middle Kingdom witnessed an increase in the expression of personal piety, or what might be called, which gives each individual a soul that can be welcomed next to the gods after death. Literature in the Middle Kingdom was also characterized by the sophisticated compositions of subjects and characters written in an eloquent and bold style, and the relief and pictorial sculpture of the period of hidden arrests, so individual details reached new levels of technical perfection. The last ruler of the Middle Kingdom, Amenemhat III, allowed Asian settlers to live in the Delta region, to provide an adequate labor force, particularly in active mining and city building. Subsequently, these ambitious construction and mining activities, in addition to the subsequent insufficient flooding of the Nile and Malika, led to economic tension that precipitated its decline into the Second Intermediate Period during the 13th and 14th dynasties. During this decline, the Asian foreign sect began to dominate the Delta region, which later and eventually led to the extension of their authority over northern Egypt and were known as the Hyksos. Also in about 1650 BC, with the weakening of the power of the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom, the Asian immigrants and settlers living in the eastern Delta region in the town of Zwan took control of the region and forced the central government to retreat to Thebes, where the pharaoh was treated as a vassal and paid tribute. The Hyksos imitated models of government and Egyptian government, so they appointed themselves pharaohs, and thus incorporated Egyptian elements into the culture of the Bronze Age. After their retreat, the Theban kings found themselves trapped between the Hyksos from the north and the Hyksos ally, the kingdom of Kush, from the south. Nearly 100 years after the Hyksos took control of the rule, which was characterized by indolence and cultural inactivity, Thebes' forces were able to gather enough strength to challenge the Hyksos to a conflict that lasted for 30 years, before the advent of the year 1555 BCE. Ra2 and Kamos from the defeat of the Nubians in Kush, but the credit for the final elimination of the Hyksos in Egypt is due to Kamos' successor, Pharaoh Ahmose I. In the ensuing New Kingdom, militarism became a major priority for the pharaohs, who sought to expand Egypt's borders and secure complete hegemony in the Near East. Thank you for listening.